What's going on, everyone? It's my pleasure to introduce Craig. What brought you into this space here, this tutorial Linux space?
Well, I think it was just because of your YouTube name, very high SEO organic value.
Totally
Uh,
unintentional.
so when I was kind of getting into IT, I had a very unique background of when I was growing up, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to college just to go figure it out. I actually intended to be a teacher. I actually intended to be a choir director. So I did a bunch of like auditions for voice masters stuff, choir director type deals. Ended up going to Illinois State, and then I just didn't really know what to do, and I just kind of got into some philosophy classes, some political classes. Kind of changed my major a bunch of times. Ended up in a business major, and then throughout the whole time, and mostly after college, I realized, oh wait, I kind of enjoy computers. I always grew up. We had a old Windows machine, and I would go through and try to replace all of the crappy Windows programs with open source programs because they just ran better from a memory footprint. That kind of led me to open source software, and then that kind of led me to, wait a second, there's a complete operating system based on this kernel called Linux, and that kind of led me to controlling my computers, led me to more simplicity, and led me to kind of a digital privacy angle, which is one of my passions today. So that's kind of how I got into servers. I started looking all over the web and going through all the gunk out there, and I discovered your channel. I discovered the Jupiter Broadcasting. I started listening to a lot of them,
Yeah.
and then I started.
Is that Brian Cantrell and co, like doing those interviews on there?
Yeah, Linux Action Show. That was huge for me because it was exciting the way they presented it, and just talked about everything going on in the community and things. And like, oh wait, I'm gonna go check that out, whatever. But then your channel was really, you just felt like this guy that I could just listen to, and you weren't overproduced, but you were professional enough, and just kind of shot the shit. And I really took it to kind of guiding me through how I wanted to drive my career forward.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. It's funny. Yeah, I find one of these like questions that always crops up, and you'll see it in the comments and everywhere else, is like, oh, I've just spent like 5 years learning this other thing, but I actually really like Linux, and I like, I like the idea of a server administration or doing stuff on some cloud. And like, is it too late for me? I'm like, I'm 24. Is it too late for me? And I'm always just like, what are you talking about? All the best people in this industry like usually come from something else, have some other skill that they have before they jump into tech, and then relate all of that tech knowledge like onto the stuff they already know. I love that it was kind of the same experience for you, where you have, you clearly have like music as a passion and an art that you understand. It's like, I really think having something else to hang knowledge onto helps you learn stuff quicker, especially when it's something that if you just try to memorize it is very dry, like
Mhm.
the Linux file system or something. It's like if you have already learned other things in your life, it's just easier to absorb some of that stuff because you have things to relate it to. You've gone through like a skill that you had to practice, even though it wasn't fun at times. That kind of thing. I think it really helps. It's cool.
Yeah, you really use that motivation to kind of fuel yourself and get yourself started, and then you just kind of find other motivators along the way.
Yeah. And the great thing I think about tech in kind of the way that you described is that, you kind of bounced from one tech topic to another. And I think that's the most natural thing in the world. And it's one of the only, I don't know if you can do that with, I don't know, like Olympic ice skating. Can you like bounce around a bunch of different topics in the way that you're motivated to that week? Like probably not. You probably have to learn the exact same fundamentals as everyone else and practice them
Mhm.
for 5 years like everyone else. Whereas here it's like you can learn one thing 1 month and learn it well, and become better at that thing than someone who's been in tech for 10 years, and then move on to the next thing. And that's slowly kind of the fundamentals and the theory will like percolate into your brain. But you'll just kind of be building on your interests. I mean, it's a huge gift to be able to kind of follow your motivation and still get good. You know, most disciplines you do that in, you just stay an amateur forever because you just did what was fun. Um, anyway, yeah, where did you kind of how did you end up jumping into this as a career?
Um, well, I originally I wanted to get more into server administration, and so I kind of did that like a hobby level. I just have like some masks and some ties and the whole fun stuff. But there's really, I mean, as the markets evolved, there's clouds the way to go, and that's where the jobs are at. And as much as it'd be so much fun to do like actual server admin work and get down in the trenches and stuff, I feel like being in a nice air conditions behind a computer screen and being able to do what I want to do was the way to go for me. So I kind of embraced, wait a second, I'm going to learn how all that server stuff works, but then I'm going to apply my skills more into a cloud environment. So that's kind of how I got into the cloud ecosystem. And my company uses AWS very heavily. So I just started learning how things work under the hood and learning how to make stuff for the business, give them value. And I've been with my company for 6 years, and I've had 4 different titles. I started more as like a front end WordPress type guy, and I just quickly, the more I learned about that, the less I enjoyed it. So I just moved over to the server team, and I've just kind of climbed my way up the ladders. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm tackling bigger projects now, and it's looking back and taking the time to understand little things here and there as you see them. It's really worth your time. And I think the number one thing that I would tell myself is to have patience. A lot of people just kind of are just too eager to do things, and it's finding that balance of being able to know when to work quick and know when to work slower.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's really interesting. As you um, so you got into AWS, which makes sense. It's the 800-pound gorilla of the cloud world. It's one of the things that I've been trying to get people, the ideas that I've been trying to get people used to, which is like, yes, all the Linux stuff still matters. It's just you're probably not going to be racking pizza boxes and like doing cabling and then setting up like the base OS stuff. It's like if you just work one level of abstraction above that, where it's like that stuff's provided to you, learn that layer, learn Packer, learn some config management stuff, learn how cloud init works and how to use it, those types of things. It's just, yeah, I agree. I think you always kind of have to have your nose like in the air, like seeing which way the wind is blowing, in terms of, because there's entire wings of this industry that just like close down every 5 years. And that's not even just a new thing because of the cloud. I mean, it's always kind of been like that, maybe a little slower, but yeah, I think cloud spend is not going down, people. Like that is not decreasing year over year. So like there's and I think one of the crazy things in that kind of I guess this part of the industry is that it's the first time I've ever seen ops-ish people, like infrastructure folk, successfully make the business case that oh no, like we're actually delivering value to you now on the cloud. I know there was like this big attempt of kind of like pushing for no ops stuff and like, you don't need ops people anymore, but it was so far from reality that it's like, oh, okay, even for that stuff you still need someone who understands AWS intimately, because as soon as something goes wrong, all the lambdas in the world don't help you. You're going to want to learn some cloud stuff. Like, yeah, the days of just sitting on the OS alone are, I think, behind us. And I encourage everyone to do what you did, which is learn broadly and get comfy, whether you philosophically agree or disagree with cloud companies themselves or what they charge or whatever. Yeah, it's the way of the world. This is how everything runs. Oh shit! Sorry, I finally remembered what I was going to say. It's we finally, ops people of old. Uh, I feel like we never were able to convince anyone that we brought value to the table. Whereas with cloud infrastructure stuff, you see like SREs, you see like these types of cloud ops teams and infrastructure teams. Business people are starting to believe that they actually are able to add value instead of just be a cost center at the company, which has, I think, maybe never happened before,
Mm.
broadly at least, for ops, more ops like folks. Um, yeah. Whereas, it's like if you were an ops before, you would just get like, I don't know, the binary or the Java thing like a week before the release date, and it would just be like, well, just put it on the servers. Like, what do you mean? We don't have any numbers for like what scale it needs to be at or what the bugs are or what the performance is. Like, just figure it out. You're just the ops like team, take this and run it. What's so hard about that? Whereas now it's like everyone has experienced probably like restructuring some cloud infrastructure can save you like a couple $100,000 a year or a month or something. Doing that stuff right can be a huge value add. Anyway, sorry, that is my end of my philosophical treatise. Feel good about cloud infra, just for the worker, for the ops person. Um, what's your day to day like?
I so I act kind of like a liaison to the developers as far as if they need like CI/CD help or DevOpsy thing help. Kind of so my projects come in and out based on their needs. And then I'm also tackling bigger projects that can span from 3 months to maybe like 8 months or however. And then there's also priorities are always changing from leadership, and so it's just kind of ebb and flow of like what I'm working on. But pretty much that's kind of like what my day to day looks like. I do a lot of Terraform type writing, and I do a lot of kind of when things break down, kind of digging in and seeing what's going on and trying to figure it out and making it stable, and then hopefully we learn from it, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of reactive work, but our team has grown, which is nice. So I can concentrate more on some proactive work. So just trying to figure out what projects to work on every day is kind of my biggest challenge.
That's cool. Do you have any? I totally get if you can't talk about this because secrets, but
Sure.
is there any like specific project that you're particularly interested in doing that you can talk about vaguely? Like,
Yeah. So we have a lot of our stuff is in one giant AWS account. So we're trying to come up with a more multi-account approach. And so taking out like a certain product and putting it into its own account is kind of a large project because you have to kind of know exactly where all the pieces are. So that's kind of one thing that I'm working on that I'm excited about. Other things are just kind of getting my hands more into some Python development, kind of massaging some alerts and stuff that come over. So doing some stuff like that. So those are kind of the two things that I'm.
that's cool. It feels like fertile ground for digging even deeper if you ever feel like it. I mean, like,
Mhm.
you can never go wrong with getting better at Python. It's like, you do pretty much anything with that language. Um, that's cool. What you mentioned a few, but what I know people are always really curious about what the specific technologies are that you kind of use day to day. Um, so like, what do you use? I mean, you mentioned Terraform. What do you use for like CI? I'm assuming you're using like Git for version control.
Mhm.
Um, which Amazon services do you use a lot?
Yeah, so we kind of have two different paradigms of infrastructure. We have like over 5,000 websites that are kind of like unique in themselves, and they're all WordPress sites. So that your Udemy course that I took years ago kind of helped me facilitate like how all that stuff works under the hood starting out, because I didn't really know um, like WordPress and setting that up and doing all the vhosts.
Wow.
So that was
You,
helpful.
you heard it here. The Udemy course lets you scale to 5,000 websites. No, I'm just kidding. You're gonna need a lot
In the
more
description below.
yeah, you're gonna need a lot more than what's in there to do the
Yeah, for sure.
scale this,
For sure.
to scale it out.
But it's a good starting point to kind of taking a step back and being like, all right, now I can look at what we have going on. So the one thing we have is we have some load balancers on top of a bunch of EC2 fleets, and they kind of scale out based on CPU. And then, so we have probably 100 to 200 sites per like those resource sets. Mm-hmm. And then we scale them out. So if we need more sites, we just do another set of those resources. Yep. And we have like 5,000 of those. So for those, we have developers that push code into a Git repo, and then we're actually utilizing Bamboo from Atlassian. Mm-hmm. And then for our products, those are mostly containerized, and those are inside of Amazon ECS. Some of them are using Fargate, some of them are using EC2, just depending on how they are set up. And cool. We're using Bitbucket pipelines, so it's a pretty scalable system. Not a lot of things break with the ECS, which is kind of nice. The only time things break is when unknown upgrades happen, which is whatever.
All the time, unpredictable.
All the time.
Yeah.
So, and we've just started to look at some Kubernetes EKS, but I'm not sold on why we need to go that route. But the more I learn about it, the more we will know, because we always have newer products, and products are always changing. So that's kind of what our infrastructure looks like right now.
Very interesting. That is, I think people are going to get a lot out of that. I think that's super cool, because I think anyone who's done like small scale stuff on servers can kind of relate and be like, oh, okay, there's like these extra layers, and they manage them in these kind of, you know, like you said, resource sets, or like, you know, kind of pods of functionality that you can scale up and out. It's cleverly done. So you've been at this company for a long time. What do you more generally, not like specific skill wise, what do you find the most interesting? You know, what gets you out of bed in the morning at work now, and how has that shifted as you've become more senior?
I think the unknowns and the difficult issues that are possible to be solved but have not yet been solved. Like maybe someday I'll solve why we have this weird scaling issue based on like some unknown MySQL processes that blip up every now and again. Maybe I can solve that. That kind of gets me up in the morning. It's just maybe I'll have some time to work on that. But really, what I've appreciated and why I've stayed around is because there's just the way we manage my team. There's a lot of freedom to kind of choose what you work on. We have the high level business needs, but then we're very self-organizing, and there's no like mandate exactly like you have to be doing this all the time. You have to be working on that. Like let me look at over your shoulder at your code. So there's a lot of autonomy that we've brought into our team, and a lot of credit goes to my former boss, but my new boss that we hired on as a team. He's really helped shape that. So I'd say the team itself and the dynamics of identifying everyone as a human and being able to know everyone's communication styles and working with each other, being able to work on your own yet come to a daily stand up and kind of shoot the shit and just talk about. We started using, I don't know if you're familiar with the core protocols, but we use one of those where it's kind of like we check in at the beginning of the meeting, so it can kind of gauge people's emotional state. Like you don't want to be talking to someone the same way if they're all kind of bummed out or tired or depressed for whatever reason. So that's been.
Can you explain that, the core protocols?
Yeah, so it's you come up to your stand up, and then people kind of, there's like 6 different things that you could say based on kind of how you're feeling. Like, hey, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, and then you kind of give like a little rundown of why you're you're feeling that way, and then you either say you're in or you say you're out, and then and then everyone else says welcome, and then you move on to the next person, and it kind of identifies the emotional state and kind of like where you're at for the duration of the meeting. And if you choose to, you can check out of the meeting and like you just come back the next day. Like you don't, there's no need to be on a meeting, just kind of just be there to be there. Like you have to be engaged to define your engagement with the meeting. And I don't remember who made it. There's like a PDF I could send you or whatever, and you can link it. It's so our team adopted that, and some other teams are starting to adopt that, which is cool. And there's some other stuff. There's like some voting things in it, and so
I'm interested in that.
yeah.
That sounds cool. It sounds like actually maybe a clever way to replicate how a really healthy team that's been together for a long time already is kind of, but you're kind of giving people permission to do that even without knowing each other super well. It's like
Mm-hmm.
okay to say you feel like shit today and like you're just out of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to all pretend that everyone is like 100% every single morning at 8.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm interested in that. um it sounds like a really healthy just kind of culture and company dynamic. How what are the things about that culture? I mean, it sounds like you do a bunch of things that are really healthy. What are the culturally important things to you, the things that you think really make a difference in terms of how much you get done and how human and decent you feel while you're doing it?
Um, well, it's interesting because there's kind of like this dynamic of the rest of the company, and then there's kind of this dynamic of my team. We've always kind of been like, I wouldn't say siloed, but kind of like on our own little island doing our own little thing. And as time goes on, we've tried to present that to the rest of the company, and they may take it on or they may not. And the reason behind that is because we're the ones powering the technology that makes the company money, and so they need to recognize that, hey, we're not just some guys and gals just in the trenches shoveling and fire into the furnace. Like we're human beings, and we have thoughts and emotions too, and so we need to kind of come up with these ways to talk to each other that everyone else can respect us. So things so we heavily use Slack, and there it got to a point where we were just inundated all day with like, hey, do this, do this, do this, and so many people like thought if they kept adding you or they kept messaging you or whatever that you'd get it done faster. And it's like, hey, this can't be a thing. So one thing we introduced was like a process, like a ticketing system for our team that, and like, hey, if you have something to do, please put in a ticket, and then we'll get to it. And that's kind of been like a guard against just the monotony of like burning out and just so much context switching that was going on earlier. So that's a big challenge that we've been addressing. Um, it's very easy to get distracted, especially when you're working at home and you just got to control what you're working on. And
Yeah. And that is just like poisonous nightmare fuel when anyone, when these kind of abstractions between teams are broken or these kind of barriers don't exist. I don't want to use the word barriers, since that's literally the opposite of what the DevOps people are trying to break down. It's like if you don't have a real interface between teams that is like scalable, then
Mhm.
it's just everything becomes a nightmare. I think it's easy, especially companies that are growing or have a management team that kind of don't understand how tech organizations get run. It can be a huge problem. And I know personally, I have, especially in my younger years, rebelled loudly against ticketing systems because I thought it was just a way, thought it was just a
Yeah,
way to get like more squeeze like the people
track it.
more. Exactly. Yeah, right. And then it's like, oh, like how many tickets a week? It's like, well, okay, I'll just make up more smaller tickets. Like this is the worst possible system because it's so easy to game. Um, but when it's used appropriately, not to measure performance necessarily, but
Mhm.
it's really to force other parts of the organization to have a single like entry point or
Mhm.
kind of API call to a team that then gives that team the ability to like organize that work on some kind of backlog in addition to their other stuff. And that like brings it can bring control back to a team. It's not really a way in. It's actually a nice little I don't know, protective layer. It sounds like that's what that was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
we try to create one funnel and then triage, and then we can close the external ones and create actual internal tickets, and trying to come up with a more Scrum-like process that is very challenging with the work that we have. So
plus, I think Slack should just come up with like internal metrics that we can expose to how many times someone has at here or at all a channel with more than like 5 people in it, and for every time they do it, they like move the color value of the normal black text like slightly more gray, you know, like you just, the more you shout, the less people are going to hear you. But it's
my one pet peeve of Slack has always been when people at me in a direct message, and then I just like flip table. I'm done.
it's just, yeah, it's just, you wouldn't do that to someone in person. Almost, it's almost like that Reddit effect where people are just douchebags for no reason. It's like, you wouldn't come up to my desk 4 times a day and just stand there, right, and be like, where are we on this thing? Although now that I say that, I've seen that too, so I take it back. It's interesting. You've gone kind of junior to senior. What are some of the things as you are onboarding new people that you see? What are some of the skills that new people neglect before they get into tech? And they could be tech skills, they could be soft skills, they could be anything.
Sure. Oh, a big question that we try to ask people is kind of understanding the difference between like bare metal and like cloud. Like we were kind of alluding to this earlier. And there's a lot of people that come in and they kind of like, they feel like they're just regurgitating like a AWS certificate. They're just kind of naming resources and buzzwords, and things aren't really clicking on like what they're meant to do. Like, oh, I made a Lambda and then I did a Route 53. And so I would, so if you're a junior person coming into like a more cloud engineering position, or a DevOps role or what have you, I would really understand the rudimentary, like what the stuff that AWS is running, like what it actually is. Like it's not just some magic thing that you throw code in and then it does stuff. Like understand kind of the networking behind it, and it can be very basic, just because you'll just having that very basic understanding of being able to abstract the two out, you'll get into that company, and if you're an appropriate fit, and then you'll start to learn along the ways as you're there exactly what everything is doing. So that's one thing that I'd recommend. Another thing, kind of going more to the soft skills side, is just really having patience, understanding that everyone communicates in a different way, and being able to know when the appropriate way to communicate is. A lot of time, junior people will kind of just bug you throughout the day for no real reason, or they'll just, and you should think through what you're asking before you ask it. Like just be able to know how much time you should give yourself to discover things on your own before you ask it. There's a certain threshold where you get frustrated, then you should be able to ask the questions. You shouldn't just ask them right away. But I do like when juniors ask questions, because I don't want them to just feel like they're never going to learn. So those are kind of the two big things that I like to interview for when people are coming in. Yeah.
That's great. I love the way you talked about asking questions. I couldn't agree more. It's like juniors that ask questions too soon or haven't actually done kind of like systematic problem solving first, you're just cheating yourself out of learning, because all a senior is doing different is the same systematic troubleshooting process with a bigger database of stuff they already know, which means they can usually get to the end and solve the problem without asking for help. It's fully expected that juniors will have to ask for help and get stuck at some point in that systematic troubleshooting process, because they simply run up against something that they don't know is there, don't know to ask. And at that point, it's completely fine to ask a senior person. But yeah, you're just cheating yourself out of practice in that systematic troubleshooting kind of like method if you try to shortcut that because you're just trying to get like the result. You're just trying to get the thing fixed and the ticket done or whatever. It's like, well, you're not getting any better, so that sucks. That's really interesting. I like
I
that.
would also to go like kind of the third thing is I would really try to identify how you learn. I know that's such a loaded question and such a tough thing to do, and you'll learn it the more you mature in your career. But I really find that tackling projects and making them very, very simple and iterating on them and coming up with a way, maybe come up with a like something that's kind of like super free or something that's very inexpensive and come up with just like a way to get the code into there and like a little tiny hello world, and then being able to kind of push things out and break things and fix things and improve things as they go. I think there's a lot of and there's just very understand how everything's working, even if it's super simple, because later on you'll appreciate that you took the time to do that.
That's a really interesting idea. I can, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how I've learned things or how I recommend learning things, um, which are hopefully the same thing. And correct me if this is not what you're saying. If not, this is
Sure.
not the spirit of what you're saying. But yeah, I find the sooner you do a very simple end-to-end run of the whole like thing you're gonna do, so like a full prototype, no matter how
Hmm.
simple or unrealistic, is better than one really fleshed out portion of your program or your infrastructure or whatever that doesn't actually work because it's not connected to anything else, if that makes sense. So it's like the idea of if you're doing like some DevOpsy thing, I don't know. It's like you just want to get the simplest possible like Docker file into the simplest possible like CI job to build it into the simplest possible way to get it into your um I don't know, like Quay or whatever you're using, in the simplest possible way to pull it down from whatever container orchestration thing you're using. And then like just get the hello world all the way through and then start building on it, then start making it more complicated, then make it a real app, then split it into multiple containers. It's like, because if you it's true, you run into some people that have gotten very good at a small portion of this work, like inside of a single skill set. They'll write you like an amazing uh bunch of Docker files, and they can do Docker Compose on their laptop all day long. But then as soon as you introduce like the real constraints of like a production system running on Kubernetes or Nomad or something else, it's just like half that knowledge becomes useless because you're architecting for something else or optimizing for something else, and it doesn't help. Yeah, you having more, especially as a beginner, having more broad, general theoretical knowledge of how things connect to each other is more useful than being specialized in any one thing. That's my
Yeah,
also.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, and then knowing that it's going to scale as if you set it up properly, or you don't even have to do the scaling right away. Just get some stuff in there and being able to observe it and monitor it and know like what it's doing, and then scale it and then push more stuff into it. Yeah,
Yep.
and yeah,
I think the cloud providers have sold the scaling thing too to companies that'll
yeah,
never like need to scale, right? It's like
yeah.
there's so many companies that are just like they were doing fine with like 5 or 6 servers before, and now they're doing fine with 5 or 6 big honking instances. And it's like the the worst thing they could have done is to move to the cloud and then be like, we need to re-architect for like mega global scale and complicate things unnecessarily. I think premature optimization, it exists in infrastructure too. It's not just a programming thing where you make your program super complicated for absolutely no reason. um
Mhm.
yeah, like you said, scale as you need to, learn as you kind of on demand as you need to, like let your situation kind of dictate what you do. Don't like try to impose your will just because you read some book and were like, oh, the practice of cloud system administration says that this is a nice like 4-tier architecture, so like let's cram another caching layer in between the database. And it's just like, well, database isn't running particularly hot, like that's just adds a lot of complication for nothing. So yeah, don't impose your will on the world unless you really really unless the situation calls for it. Two things, two more of these like kind of premeditated questions. One, did you have uh, any mentors at your first jobs or like while you were learning this? And And what was that kind of relationship like? I think people, the reason I ask is I think people underestimate how important it is to have like a mentor at work that you can ask stuff in real time.
Yeah, my previous boss was really a very good mentor. Um, just the way like he approached work and he tried to lead things. Um, I think establishing a healthy one-on-one is very important. The way at first I kind of felt like, oh, I didn't really understand a one-on-one early on, and I thought like the manager or whoever I was talking to that was the mentor should run the show, but really it's me that should run the show. So coming up with questions that knowing how to create a list of questions and then how to ask things in real time, knowing that balance is very there's certain things that you want to ask right away, but there's also certain things that you want to think about more before you ask them, kind of going back to what I was talking about before, like knowing when to ask the question. So coming up with a list and having a weekly healthy one-on-one is very useful to uh, um, the mentor question that you asked. And I think that, yeah, just being able to know the right questions and then and then off of that digging in deeper and kind of having just being able to ask a question in real time and then not being afraid to hop on a Zoom chat and just shoot the shit, and like it may take 10 minutes, it may take 30 or an hour, but knowing that once you get that answer, then you can move on and you feel motivated to keep going, to kind of, it's like a cycle of asking questions. And
I like that. Yeah, it's definitely, I think every manager dreads, well, that might not be true. Some
mm,
managers that I've had in the past have definitely tried to drive the one-on-one because I think it's like, oh, this is where I communicate to my ICs, like what's happening. And it can often be just like you sitting there. That's never a productive one-on-one.
yeah, one-on-one shouldn't be what it shouldn't be the manager asking you and getting like updates and like knowing what you're doing and then micromanaging you. It should be them getting the information from you and being able to lead you and give you the things that you need
Yeah.
based on their knowledge or whatever they can resources they can give you. So I
Yeah.
like to ask people that question in interviews: is what is the purpose of a one-on-one?
Well, that's good. I might add that to my question list. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
makes sense. You would get some very different answers based on someone's like management philosophy. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
people use that as your opportunity to get context from your
Yeah.
manager and to say things. Uh, and it's okay to bring up problems. Obviously, do this judiciously. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's like if you're having a conflict with someone else or something, you can try to get some you can try to work around those types of problems. Often like your manager will have insight into what that person's personality is beyond what you see day to day,
Mm-hmm.
and can give you guidance of like, oh, this person, if you're going to communicate with them, you're going to have to, you know, like they prefer writing or they get really offended when someone challenges their ideas, so here, do this thing. um, that can just be tremendously helpful. um, Interesting. Love it. And my favorite question. It's so gimmicky, and I'm sorry.
That's
But
good.
if you were if you were basically like, you came into some new situation in a brand new body, no resume, um, but knowing what you know about the industry, even though you didn't have these specific skills you have now, how would you start over from scratch to kind of pick an optimal path to where you are now, um, presuming that that was your goal?
Yeah. So I don't know how much I would do completely differently, but I know there's a lot of things that I would add. Like one thing that I wish had done was tackle a project a lot earlier on. Even if you have, because you can spend so much time just listening to talks and reading blog posts and then not actually doing anything about it and be like, oh, this one day tomorrow or next week, I'll actually start coding and doing things. So I would just pick a project and kind of go through it. There's one project that I saw called like the resume coding challenge. And basically it's just setting up a simple CI/CD pipeline and standing up some static site infrastructure, and then kind of coming up with like a blog post, and then being able to push that through and just seeing how everything connects and understanding everything about it. That is definitely very valuable to do early on, and understanding that you don't have to come up with a project and then do it right away. You can take as much time as you need, and through that project you can seek out the little pieces and then find like some tech talks based on that little section of the project, or some blog posts on that little section of the project. And then that kind of, that over time that will come together, and then you won't even have to look those things up anymore. You'll just know it. And then you take that exact same approach and you move on to the next big thing that you want to tackle. So having projects that you can seek out additional knowledge, and then knowing when you're able to concentrate on the project versus knowing when you can just sit back and passively listen to someone talk. That's also, for me, I learn a lot in the morning, and then I also get difficult things done in the morning once I kind of ease myself into that learning mindset. And then as the day goes on, I've found that my motivation and my drive kind of just deteriorates. And then once I hit like 5 o'clock, I don't even go on the computer anymore. I'm done. Having a healthy balance of not burning yourself out, and knowing when you as a person can learn the best and can get things done the best.
That's a phenomenal answer. There's so much in there that resonates with me. First of all, congratulations for having the self-knowledge and discipline to actually stop trying to be productive when you're no longer productive.
Yes, that's hard, because you're like, wait, I'm a failure now.
Yeah, right. Or, oh, I really want to solve this problem. If I just work another 8 hours until 2 in the morning, I'll get there. And it's like, no, you'll just write a bunch of shit code that's going to make you slower tomorrow because you're going to have to debug it. Yeah, like what Rich Hickey says about like what does he call it, hammock programming or something like that. Hammock problem solving is like that's a real thing. Like when you go take a walk, when you kind of switch into more diffuse thinking or just thinking about other stuff, you'll continue solving that problem in the background. It's like you don't need to be just staring at your screen, getting more and more tired. The other thing that you mentioned, which is so true and so kind of self-aware, is when you're studying things, having this extrinsic like a project that you want to complete, like it gives you more motivation, but also it's so easy. And as a teacher, I'm sure you know way more about this than I do, but for producing durable learning, your mind has an incredible ability to trick you into feeling like you're understanding something, even though it's like in one ear or eye and out the other. Where like you'll read something complicated about Linux and you'll be like, this makes sense, but then you can't explain that. Like you don't actually know it. So you can go through a tremendous amount of material of like blog posts, people giving presentations and little TED Talks about something, and be like, I'm learning so much about tech, about the industry, about like how to develop software. But like you still can't write some like hello world, like choose your own text adventure thing in the terminal. It's like, well, none of that stuff matters before you start doing some real things, focusing on actually creating stuff as the way to learn. The way to learn is to create things first with training wheels, where you're just following along on a tutorial. Then, like you mentioned, adding on to that in a more free form way, like, okay, well, what if I want this other like method in my little program, or this other like piece of infrastructure? Let me try to add that out without any tutorial guidance now that I have a structure. And then graduating fully to, I want to get something done. Let me do the simplest iteration of that and then see if I can get it working end to end, and then dig in and, kind of flesh it out. Man, yeah, I completely agree. It's fantastic.
And then when you kind of develop that piece that you find, you don't have to throw it into your big project right away. You can kind of go back to something that is working and figure out how it works and how to implement it, and then implement it into whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm huge on digital privacy, and my phone is 0% Google.
Brilliant.
So I have, it's right here. It runs Graphene OS. So I do have a blog post that I wrote up, and I feel like it's very, so I took like a week or whatever to kind of like digest everything and take information in. So it's kind of like a quick guide on how I got started. So I feel like it might be valuable to other people that want to get off of Google. So it's on my website.
Yeah, that is
And
a
then
worthy goal, and I will link to it
cool.
below. Yeah, that's
And,
awesome.
and then another thing is I'm like talking about the cloud engineer. I'm trying to come up with kind of like a one pager to kind of like here are the projects that you should work on in order and
Ooh,
things that you should
saw that.
think about in order. Um, if you're super early, on, you're trying to get into a company. I think certificates are valuable, but if you're already in like tech or like a developer and you're just kind of moving over, I don't find them to be super valuable in getting them, but I do find them valuable in studying for them.
Yes.
So, because the test itself is just a bunch of memorization of like, here you have this situation, what resource to use, but that's not a valuable test. It's you can just look that up in documentation. You don't even memorize what everything's called.
Yeah, I will definitely link both of those things below because I think there's like a real need uh, for that. Couldn't agree more about the certs. Yeah, I so much of my learning, it's like it's a great studying for a test is a great way to structure your learning, but the
Mhm.
test itself is the least valuable
Exactly.
part of all that, which is
Plus,
why. Oh, go ahead.
plus, I've always been bad at taking tests. Like, there's like this weird anxiety in my
Yeah,
brain that I don't think the same.
yeah,
And I can't get past it. It's like,
yep. uh, at least you don't have the thing which I pity the most, which is people that manage to study an ACE test and then immediately forget all the material that they crammed
yeah,
for, which is like, why did you even do this? You just wasted a huge amount of time and brain power for
yep.
nothing.
Don't read the blog post. It's like, oh, I took 8 AWS
Yeah,
tests in one weekend. Like, there's no
exactly.
value. There's no value in
Then a company hired me and I literally destroyed their business by mistake because I'm incompetent. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you one question. I noticed on your LinkedIn that you got like a new job position, and I was curious about it.
Yeah, so I've been in ops and infrastructure and SRE for like going on 10 years. I was an SRE on Terraform Cloud. I have just moved over to a team, a almost brand new team called Product Experience Engineering. And I get to work on the thing that actually originally brought me to HashiCorp, which is working on the public architecture guides, deployment guides,
Mm.
and we're starting to crank out public Terraform modules that basically give you a best practice implementation of stuff, literally just with a Terraform apply. It's been a literal dream of mine to do this for so long because I mean, if you look at my GitHub, I literally was until 2 months ago or a month ago, whenever the last time I had time was, working on like a HashiStack thing where it's just like I just want
Yeah,
to type in Terraform apply and get console vault
yeah.
nomad using Terraform and yeah, it's just when I started using the Hashi tools, I think they're great, and I started using them in maybe 2014 2015, and it was just like you just cobbled everything together from the docs, and half the shit wasn't in the docs. And
Mm.
HashiCorp has gotten a lot better and written a tremendous amount of documentation, but for that first, there's still stuff to do for that first contact that an infrastructure person has with their software. Um, and that's what we're working on, trying to make
That's awesome.
trying to give the reference architectures an overhaul, making them a little bit more like less about just HashiCorp and more about like, here's how this would like realistically look in AWS or GCP or Azure. And then actually give like implementation modules for all at least the three big clouds that let you just get a thing set up in like 10 minutes and just start playing with it, because that is what I wanted, like kind of what you were talking about before. I just wanted to have a thing to mess with, to like change to that. I mean, that's how you learn. And if someone needs a month to get this thing running, to get a console cluster running, or needs to spend a full week, it's just not going to happen. It's like, who has that much free time outside of work? So yeah, that's why I'm pumped. Craig, I appreciate the time and the time you took for this and the ideas that you shared. I think you brought up some tremendously interesting and useful things that people will benefit from. So appreciate you paying it forward. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been fun. It's been a treat.
Yeah, right on. As we mentioned before, remember to check the links in the description for some of the cool stuff Craig was working on. You should check that out. You should definitely get Google off your phone. Oh, yeah. I'll just end on that very sad note. Get Google off your phone. The end. Goodbye. We're not going to talk until you do. All right. Peace.